the new testing protocols have sparked a widespread discussion and debate on whether it's the right method to adopt, considering the government panel is already expecting a third wave. While the accuracy of a rapid antigen test is not 100% reliance and entirely for positive cases may not be advisable, that is what the earlier protocol had said. While not making RT-PCR mandatory for test post 10-day isolation and at the time of hospital discharge could be debated, the proposal of not having one for a healthy traveller is controversial, and already states like West Bengal have said that they will not allow anybody to enter Bengal until and unless they have an RT-PCR negative report. Who describes what is healthy and what if a traveller is asymptomatic? These are questions that have really occupied the minds of various COVID patients, their families and our viewers. While the Apex Medical Council claims that this reduce of tests will free up labs, the emphasis must also be on increasing the labs across the country. We can't find a shortcut at the moment, with India's principal scientific advisor already confirming an impending third wave. Will easing test norms help us? Before I go across to Dr. Guleria, Director of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, I just want you to listen in to what Principal Scientific Advisor to the government, Vijay Raghavan, has told the nation today.
A phase 3 is inevitable, given the high levels of circulating virus. But it's not clear on what time scale this phase 3 will occur. Hopefully, incrementally, but we should prepare for new waves. Previous infections and vaccines will cause adaptive pressure on the virus for new kinds of changes which try to escape it. And therefore, we should be prepared scientifically to take care of that. So B117, other variants like 617 are accumulating changes which show excellent vaccines, on which vaccines show excellent efficacy, but ongoing surveillance is needed, and vaccine updates as we go ahead with new kinds of variants are inevitable.
So the legitimate question tonight that we want to pose to Dr. Guleria is just one. Will the test and track method be now compromised by the new testing strategy and SOP? That's the question and the debate coming up on the other side.
You're watching the News Hour at 9. Debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Good evening, Dr. Guleria. And many people are today confused with the changing SOPs that have come about. First of all, I want to ask you the announcement today by the Principal Scientific Advisor about a third wave which is impending. How serious is this? What have studies shown so far? What's the time frame that we should expect the third wave in? Because right now we're bursting at its seams as far as the health infrastructure is concerned, just handling the second wave. What should we be prepared for, Dr. Guleria?
So I think the key message is that we should not just feel that once the second wave comes down, we will not have another wave as we thought of when the first wave came down. And even if you look at past experiences, and even if you look at the 1918 pandemic, the Spanish flu, we had 3 waves, and the third wave also happened a few months after the second wave had come down. So I think this is just a warning that as we are in the middle of a second wave, when it comes down, we should not make the same mistakes as we made when the first wave came down, and we should aggressively pursue the policy of COVID-appropriate behavior, aggressive vaccination, and trying to contain the disease as much as we can, even if the cases are less.
But Dr. Guleria, the question many people are asking is the new RT-PCR testing protocol that has been introduced by the ICMR yesterday talks about reducing dependence on RT-PCR tests. Now, I understand with the kind of infections that are being reported that these testing kits may be in short supply and the demand may be higher. But do you think it is safe to only rely on the rapid antigen test? I mean, many times this comes out negative can you assume that a patient is not COVID positive if a rapid antigen test gives you the other report? And secondly, many people, at least in the second wave, have seen symptoms persisting beyond the 14 days period that people are expecting to keep themselves isolated. In such a case, without a doctor's certificate to leave discharge from a hospital or even leave your isolation at home, is that really advisable?
So two questions. The first question is the rapid antigen test. A negative rapid antigen test does not rule out COVID infection. You can still have COVID infection. Very important to keep in mind. But one must sort of see how does the rapid antigen test help you. Now, in a situation where you have a very high positivity rate, your case positivity rate is more than 10%, the rapid antigen test has a very high positivity. So in what we are finding in our own hospital, that the rapid antigen test within 5 minutes tells you whether the person has COVID or not, and therefore the load on RT-PCR becomes less. But RT-PCR still continues to be the gold standard. So what I would say is, if you have features suggestive of COVID-19, you have fever, cough and cold, you can get a rapid antigen test done, and within 5 minutes you will come to know whether you are COVID positive or not. If you are COVID positive, you don't need to go an RT-PCR test. This is a very specific test. If it is positive, it is definitely positive. But the sensitivity is low. So if it is negative, that means maybe your viral load is low and you should therefore then go ahead and get an RT-PCR test done. So a negative rapid antigen test means get an RT-PCR test done. But if it is positive, isolate yourself, start treatment and contact your doctor so that appropriate treatment can be done. What is the advantage? The advantage is that you come to know immediately within a few minutes that you have COVID, rather than waiting for your RT-PCR report, where in some areas is taking almost 3-4 days. So you are able to get an idea whether you have COVID-19 at a very early stage. And this will allow more RT-PCR tests to be done where they are really needed. At the same time, I do agree with you that we have to increase more and more testing facilities. We have to do more and more RT-PCR. The kits are now being made in India, so it's something that can be done, ramped up quickly, and indigenous testing needs to be done. But RT-PCR still continues to be the gold standard. Second question was regarding coming out of isolation. Now, what the guidelines have shown are suggesting is that if you are asymptomatic and you are afebrile for 48 hours and you have crossed the 10-day mark, then you are not infectious and you can come out even without getting the RT-PCR test done. And this is based on data which has come from two broad groups. One group which looked at people after 7 days, they kept taking their nasal swab. The RT-PCR was positive, but when they did the cultures are all negative. That means you were now shedding dead virus and you were not infectious. The second group was those who looked at people who had come in close contact with a positive individual, and they found that after the 7th and 8th day, all those who had come in close contact with a positive individual did not get COVID-19. Based on this data, the guidelines clearly say that if you are not immunocompromised, you don't have a disease which may lead to more viral application, like you're on chemotherapy or you're on chronic dialysis, if you're healthy and you've crossed the 10-day mark with 2 days without any fever, then you are non-infectious and you can come out of isolation. Your RT-PCR test may continue to be positive. After 14 days, many people have what we call post-COVID sequelae or long COVID. Fever for some time persists, body aches, myalgias, not able to concentrate, what is known as brain fog, or a chronic fatigue syndrome can even persist up to 6 to 12 weeks. So this is something which the virus causes, and it is known as long COVID or post-COVID sequelae.
So, Dr. Guleria, how safe is it going to be to have a norm that travelers don't need to have a tested certificate, if they feel normal? There are so many asymptomatic patients in this second wave. If people don't test themselves, then we could have a situation that these travelers could take the virus from one state to another. Already we have reports coming in from Madhya Pradesh where the rural areas are now reporting positive cases. How sound scientifically is this suggestion that no RT-PCR tests are required for asymptomatic people?
So I do agree with you that there are about 30 to 40% of people who may be COVID positive, but maybe in the asymptomatic stage or in the pre-symptomatic stage, and therefore they may not have any symptoms to say they are COVID positive. But there are two things to keep in mind. First is that all states are not really like international borders. So they're very porous, and people will continue to move from one state to the other from different ways, whether it be through road, through rail, or through the airlines. And I don't think you can have a strict monitoring for people who are coming from one area to the other as far as state borders are concerned. So I don't think in the long run this would be very useful. The second important thing to remember is that you can still have COVID infection. You may be in the incubation period, and your RT-PCR would be negative because your viral load is low. And 3-4 days later, when the viral load becomes significant, your RT-PCR test will be positive, and you may have also symptoms, or you may be asymptomatic. What it means is that you will give a false sense of security to an individual that, I have fever now, but the RT-PCR I did when I crossed the border was negative. So this fever is not related to COVID. I don't need to get my test done again. And he would be going around in the community spreading the disease thinking that he is COVID negative. Therefore, it may be counterproductive if you start insisting that you get a test done, because for the two reasons that I mentioned.
Well, Dr. Guleria, there is another round of questions that have come in from several of our viewers ever since you made the statement about CT scans not being necessary for all people, who've tested positive. I want to ask you, you're a pulmonary expert, and I want to ask you, Dr. Guleria, that there are people who do not have any breathing problems for the first 5 or 6 days, and then suddenly they have this problem of dipping oxygen, and then when the CT scan is done, it shows a patch or two on the lungs. Now, if you're saying that CT scans are not required, is this a blanket advice that you're giving people who are suffering from COVID? And is this something that people would be wise to follow?
So first of all, let's look at the data. The data suggests that 85% of people who get COVID-19 have mild disease and are asymptomatic, or are mildly symptomatic and have mild disease and will recover on their own without even specific treatment. Doing a CT scan in them will be of no use. The 15% that you mentioned who will have fever which persists till beyond the 5th day, they have some degree of fall in oxygen saturation, they have some respiratory difficulty, definitely should have a CT scan done and biomarkers done. But the 85% of people who have mild disease and who recover on their own should not have a CT scan done, and that's because it can be harmful. I will give you some data which is from the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effect of Atomic Radiation, the INSCAR, which is a report, and it says a CT chest has, in terms of effective dose, what is known as 7.8 millisieverts, which is equivalent to 390 chest x-rays. The range is between 200 to 500. A recent report by the US FDA also said that one CT scan of the chest is equivalent to 7 millisieverts, which is also equivalent to around 390 chest x-rays. And there is a radiation exposure. A paper published some time back in the New England Journal of Medicine by a group called Brenner and Hall, the two authors, suggested that in the US, just because of excessive CT heads being done, they were having almost 700 extra cancers per year. Therefore, if we are looking at CT scans being done at the younger age group, we have to be very careful because we need to look at the cumulative dose. You get a CT scan in a 25-year-old person right now who's asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic and will otherwise recover. And over the next few years, he gets more and more scans done or some other procedures done for something or the other. Your cumulative dose of radiation will increase the chance of cancer that this patient may have. And there are now papers published by the Radiological Society of North America, which says that CT scan of this thing needs to be looked at gently and a wise use is required. And they also say that whenever you have this exposure, you have to be careful. I've been a member of the International Atomic Energy Agency on radiation protection in medicine. And although in medicine is the only area where there is no upper limit of radiation exposure, because we feel that we are doing more good than harm. CT scan is an invaluable tool, but it should not be exploited because it can cause harm. That's the message that I want to give. If you have severe disease, if you are having symptoms, you must have a CT scan done. But if you're asymptomatic on day one, you get a CT scan, it causes more harm. I know patients who feel I got a CT scan on day one, it was normal, I don't need to worry. But they get symptomatic on day 6 and now they have breathlessness and now the CT scan is showing patches. There was no point getting a CT scan on day 1. You don't need to get it done. If you are having symptoms on day 5, then it is worthwhile to get a CT scan done because it's giving you a false sense that your lungs are all right. So it's very important to know which test to do and which day to do it and who needs to get it done. Otherwise, you are harming yourself, especially by the exposure that you have. And like I said, if one CT chest will give you roughly around 300 X-rays, and even with the newer machines, this may come down, but still there is radiation exposure which is occurring.
Dr. Guleria, you mentioned a figure, and that figure, does it stand in the second wave? You said 85% of the patients may not have very severe symptoms. Given the load of patients, especially requiring ICU beds, oxygen beds in the second wave, do you still think it's only 15% of the people who may have these acute symptoms? Are you still sticking to the 85-15 kind of divide in the percentages? Because it seems from the reports that we get from various states and cities as if the number is far more.
So I think we have to look at it both in terms of absolute number and percentage. When we looked at it in the past, we were having less than 1 lakh cases a day, and therefore the numbers was less. Now we are touching 4 lakh cases a day, and the rise in the number of cases is very, very rapid. So there are two things. One is the number of cases that you're seeing per day, because if you get 4 lakh cases a day, 15% of 4 lakhs is much more than 15% of 1 lakh. The second issue to remember is the rate of rise. The last time the rate of rise of the cases was slow. So you had a good turnover time. Those who got admitted on day 1, by the time they were all right and got discharged on 8th or 10th day, you could take in more patients. But now the curve is almost vertical. Therefore, the number of patients that you get per day is so much that you don't have a turnover time. And that is why we're seeing this huge difficulty in terms of oxygen beds, in terms of oxygen, in terms of ICU beds, because the cases are more and the rate of rise of cases is so rapid that it has really changed the scenario, but the percentage remains the same, 85 and 15.
Dr. Guleria, there have been some reports coming in from Vizag which have kind of speculated on whether there is a new strain or a new mutant variety of the virus, which is possibly even more lethal than the present mutant variety that we're seeing in the second wave. Are there any confirmed reports of any further mutation in the virus itself, and whether there is a new mutant that we have found in India?
So there will be mutants that we will find, and there are going to be mutation in the virus as we go along. The only issue is whether this is a mutant, the variant of interest, or this is a variant of concern. There have been reports of a new variant being reported in Andhra Pradesh and in Vizag, which seems to be, based on whatever data is there, may be more infectious, and some suggestion that it may be causing more serious illness. But I think we need more data before we can say that definitely. There is a need for us to start doing aggressive genome sequencing to really pick up variants early and correlate them with the clinical and epidemiological picture. Because you may pick up a variant, but is that variant causing more cases? Is that variant causing more deaths? Is that variant causing reinfection, or is it causing decrease in the efficacy of the vaccine? Are the key questions that we need to really get. So variants will be picked up as we go along, because this virus will continue to mutate, but we have to be aggressive in trying to pick them up and correlating them with clinical epidemiological profile and deciding what we should do in terms of meeting that challenge.
Dr. Guleria, the second wave, even though some numbers are lowering in states that were earlier virtually on a complete boil, like Maharashtra, even Delhi has shown a few decrease and decline in numbers. Do you think, are we seeing any any closeness to the peak having been past us, or are we still expecting the peak of this second wave to be somewhere in the near future?
So I feel that our country is huge, and therefore we will have different areas peaking at different times. You're right. It seems that the western part of the country, Maharashtra, seems to have flattened, and that seems to be showing a sort of a downward trend. Delhi is going to peak, or seems to be peaking, or central India seems to be in that state. And hopefully in the next few days, or by before the middle of this month, we should have sort of peaked and should start coming down. I'm hoping for that. But then I'm also worried that with the pandemic will move more towards the east, and we may see an increase in the number of cases in Bengal and the northeast area. And therefore, in a holistic manner, it may take some more time for the peak to happen as far as the country is concerned. But central India and western India probably will show a downward trend by the middle or end of this month.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Guleria. Everybody in this country has their fingers crossed that we see the end of the second wave. But with the news of a third wave being around the corner, we cannot afford to lower our guards. Thank you, Dr. Guleria, for joining me on the News Hour tonight.